Hey everybody, I'm here to talk to you about a very important topic in Unit 3 of AP Biology, and that is metabolism, ATP, and energy. So let's go ahead and get started. So all things here on Earth require energy, and we learned about energy flow through a food web or a simplified food chain. So energy gets passed on from the primary producers to the primary consumers and so forth up through the food chain. Remember, all living forms need energy. So if you're the smallest of cells, like a bacteria, or we're looking at eukaryotes, like plants and animal cells, all of those cells require energy in some form. So energy does flow through a system, and ultimately, as you probably already know, all energy starts with the sun, right? So the sun is harnessed by primary producers, and they convert it into a chemical that we call sugar. And so with this sugar, this organic molecule, you can transform it, break it down to make another chemical that we call ATP in the process of respiration. And so all of these chemical reactions are linked together in the flow of energy through life. And really, it's all about just taking sunlight, converting it into chemicals, converting it into different chemicals in a way to harness the energy of that chemical. There are two different types of reactions when we're talking about transforming chemicals and chemical reactions, and those are the anabolic reactions and the catabolic reactions. In the anabolic reactions, what is going on is that you're building up things. So you're putting two chemicals together, two molecules, to make something bigger. And we see this process in making macromolecules. So we take our little monomers and we put them together to make a polymer. And in that process, we lose water, which is called dehydration synthesis. You also see this in photosynthesis, right? You take these smaller molecules like carbon dioxide and water, and you add them together in the presence of sunlight with some enzymes, and you get a bigger molecule called glucose. So both of those processes represent anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions are the opposite of anabolic. So instead of building up things in catabolic reactions, what we're doing is we're breaking the bonds between molecules. So we're pretty much breaking things up. And you can see this in the process of hydrolysis, where you take a large macromolecule and you break it down into its monomers with the addition of water. It's pretty much what the human body does. Every time you eat something, it takes that larger molecule and breaks them down ultimately into glucose. And we also see it in cellular respiration, right? You have this large molecule of glucose and it's broken down into carbon dioxide and water. So all of those are considered catabolic reactions. And just to give you an example of another catabolic reaction that we will see very shortly, in cellular respiration, the first step of this process is called glycolysis. And what you see happening in glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose into two smaller molecules that are called pyruvates. And in the process, the cell will generate two ATP energy molecules. So again, because the process is breaking down glucose, it's considered a catabolic reaction. All right, so it's question time. So question number 1, what types of reactions release energy? So as you probably remember from chemistry, you can take larger molecules and you can break the bonds that hold that molecule together. And usually as you do that, it does release energy. So those kinds of reactions are called exergonic reactions. Now, in chemistry, you probably use the word ectothermic reactions a lot to describe the release of energy, but that's more technically the release of heat energy. So therm usually means heat. So exothermic reactions release heat, but if we just want to talk about the release of energy, we call those exergonic reactions. And so our second question, what types of reactions invest energy or take in energy? So what is the opposite of the exergonic? It is called endergonic reactions. So these reactions actually absorb energy, and they usually occur when you're making the bonds of larger molecules. So what's pretty cool with life forms is sometimes they pair exergonic reactions with endergonic reactions. And the reason they do this is because they're trying to be energy efficient. So if you have a process that releases energy, why don't you pair it or couple it with another reaction that absorbs the energy? So that way you don't lose a lot of energy with the chemical transformations that take place. All right, so that leads us to question 3. What is the first rule of thermodynamics? So you might have to think back from your AP Environmental Science class or maybe middle school physical science, but thermodynamics describe the change of energy. And so the first rule is energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So very important rule, very important law. Yes, energy can change shapes, it can change in its form, but it can never be created nor destroyed. All right, so that leads us to question number 4. What is the second rule of thermodynamics? So again, think back to your earlier science classes, and you might remember that the second law says that no reaction is 100% efficient. So when you transform energy from one type to another, you're always going to lose some of the efficiency of that energy. That loss is what we call entropy. So again, no reaction is 100% efficient. When you change the type of energy from one form to the next, you're always going to lose a little bit of that efficiency of the energy. And what is sad is when you lose the energy flow and the order of the energy flow, it usually will always result in the death of that living organism. So let's take a look at how the human body deals with energy, right? So we eat in order to obtain fuel, right? So we eat things that are high energy, that there are a lot of organic molecules in them. And what our body does is we break them down, right, through the digestive system. Well, that process is catabolic in nature. And so once we break these things down, though, we need something to capture that energy that's being released. Well, in the human body, the thing that we have used to capture this released energy is what we call ATP. So ATP is kind of like our body energy currency. It's short term. It's an energy storage molecule. It looks like this here on the screen. It's made of one adenine nitrogen base. It's made of 3 phosphate groups and the sugar ribose. So that molecule there is how we store our energy. And when we want to use our energy, we break this molecule apart. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it really is a modified nucleotide. So if you look at a nucleotide of DNA and you compare it to ATP, they're actually very similar. Okay, so when you have one adenine and you add it to a ribose sugar and just one inorganic phosphate, you create a molecule called AMP. The M stands for monophosphate. If you continue to add one more inorganic phosphate, you get ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. And then you probably guessed it, when you add one more inorganic phosphate to that ADP, you get ATP, the adenosine triphosphate. So you have 3 phosphates that are on that molecule. When you continue to add those phosphates to the molecule, that's an endergonic reaction because you're investing energy in making this molecule. So when you're adding the addition of the phosphates to your ATP molecule, each time that you add a phosphate, it's more difficult to add. It takes a lot of energy to place that phosphate onto the bond, so there's a lot of energy invested into that chemical bond. A lot of energy in the ATP molecule is actually stored in the third inorganic phosphate that's added. And again, that's because it takes a lot of energy to add it initially. It is also the hardest group to keep bonded. And so that's why when you go to use your ATP molecule, it's usually the third phosphate that breaks apart from the molecule that will release the energy to fuel your cell's processes. And so these inorganic phosphate groups, they kind of pop off, and when they break apart, they release energy. And then, of course, your body, your cell, uses that energy to run its processes. And the last thing we're going to do is simply just look at two different types of organisms and how they regulate their energy within their body. And those two organism classifications are ectotherms and endotherms. So if you're an ectotherm, when it does get warmer outside, so you're pretty much dependent upon the conditions of your environment. As it does get warmer, this leads to increased metabolism. So they start breaking down a lot of the glucose that they ingested. And this leads to more oxygen being consumed, because in order to break down glucose for these organisms, they do need oxygen in the process of cellular respiration. So go ahead and take a look at this graph here. The pink line represents an ectotherm. So their metabolic rate drops as the external temperature goes down. So if it gets warmer, their metabolic rate will increase and they'll start breaking down more glucose. But if it's colder, they stop breaking down their glucose, and because they do that, they don't consume as much oxygen. The blue line represents an endotherm. So endotherms are a little bit different. As the external temperature drops, their metabolic rate goes up, and that's because these organisms start trying to break down pretty much any glucose that's in their body to release that heat to keep them warm. So that heat energy will help them regulate their body temperature within, because the external temperatures outside their body are dropping. Comparing the two, you can see that ectotherms really are reliant upon the temperature of their environment to regulate their body temperature. So as the outside temperature goes up, their body temperature goes up, and their metabolism increases. However, with endotherms, they tend to use the metabolic heat that they're generating from breaking down glucose to kind of maintain an internal temperature. And when those temperatures drop, they really have to work in overdrive to keep the internal temperature the same. Okay, so that concludes just a little bit about metabolism, ATP, and yeah, that's it. So thanks.